So over the past number of years, I've become friends with our local rabbi, Rabbi Jeff. We actually got to go to Israel together a few years ago, and then pre-COVID, we used to get together to share our passion for the Hebrew scriptures and for Indian food. So at one of our first lunches, we sat down and we're having this conversation, and he leans across the table, across this tikka masala, and says to me, here's the difference between our approaches to faith. What he thinks, he says, I think this is the fundamental difference. He says, almost a quote here, Judaism doesn't require belief. You don't have to believe any set of doctrines to be fully welcomed into our community. An atheist can be a full member. So he then goes on to explain that what defines our community is not what they believe, it's what they do. So the activities form the congregation. So what makes a Jew, at least in his variety of Judaism, is celebrating Passover and bar mitzvahs. It's eating kosher pastrami on rye and keeping your meat separated from your cheeses. It's celebrating learning Hebrew and wearing yarmulkes and lighting the candle to welcome Shabbat. So being Jewish is embracing a culture. It's a way of life. You can believe whatever you want, but if you want to be Jewish, you have to embrace the Jewish way of life. So that was the first time I had heard that. Since then, we've had lots of conversations, but that was the first time I'd heard it, and it was rather stark. So I was like, so let me get this right. You can be fully Jewish. In fact, you could be a rabbi and not even believe in God. And he's like, exactly. And I'm like, whoa. So I lean in and I say, okay. But we agree, right? The most important command of the Torah, of God's law, is from Deuteronomy 6. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. This at least implies some type of alignment between what's happening internally and externally, right? There should be some type of alignment between what we believe and what we do. And he looks at me and says flatly, you can't command love. And he's kind of right. I mean, have you ever thought about it? If you just command someone, love, you don't just flip that switch. You can foster it, you can cultivate it, you can elicit it and invite it. But can you command it? And yet, there's this nagging fact that God does. So Judaism, at least in the modern expression, it de-emphasizes belief and love, and emphasizes that internal transformation and emphasizes the external, the cultural transformation. So they seek transformation through a cultural presence, through finding identity through a way of life, a set of practices. And you got to admit, for thousands of years, that's kind of worked. It's kind of worked. So the rabbi, though he was right, this is different. This is a fundamental difference between Judaism and Christianity, at least as we see this today. Jesus, by every measure, inverts this. So you ask Jesus, what's the most important thing? The most important thing you can do? He says, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then you ask him, what must we do to do the works that God requires? Actual question, John chapter 6. And Jesus' answer is, what must you do? The work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent. Love God, believing Jesus. That's what makes you a Christian. You take that out, you don't have a Christian. I mean, so this is as different as you can imagine. It's a fundamentally different kind of answer. It's not holidays, Hebrew school that define us. It's a relationship with the God of the universe through Jesus Christ. It is belief and love. It is. So Protestant Christians historically have de-emphasized cultural transformation. Becoming a Christian may or may not change the way you work and live and vacation and speak. But it must change what you love and what you believe. So I've, maybe that was probably 5 years ago now. And since then I've ruminated a lot on this conversation. We've had multiple other conversations, went down this rabbit trail when I was in Israel with the rabbis. And as I've thought about it and pondered it, two things really stand out to me. The first one is this. We're right. We're right. If you're going to follow Jesus, doing the right things isn't enough. If you don't have love, you have nothing. If you don't believe, if you don't actually have faith in him, you have nothing. So you have to have that. It's the without which nothing of Christianity. We need what Ezekiel says. We need God to remove our hearts of stone and give us a heart of flesh. It's not just external changes we're looking for. So we're right, but the second thing is that maybe we're wrong too. Maybe we're wrong to de-emphasize the cultural changes, the way that believing and loving has to change your life. So the earliest Christians weren't called Christians. They were called the Way. It was a way of life. We live like Jesus. It's a way to walk, a way to be in the world. So listen, don't worry. I'm not saying that to be a Christian, you have to wear like Christian clothes and go to a Christian school and buy a Christian car at a Christian car dealership and eat Chick-fil-A. It's too simplistic. But if we live and dress and talk and work and eat and vacation and spend our money and consume media just like everybody else, at what point do we become just like everybody else? At what point does being a follower of Jesus become meaningless? Do we lose our identity as children of God? Do we become just as anxious and busy and addicted and joyless and restless as everyone else in America right now? And since those conversations, I don't know about you, but I am increasingly convinced that we need to reevaluate our relationship with culture. That it has to, this love and belief has to work its way out in how we live somehow. It has to, and if it doesn't, then following Jesus is going to become meaningless. And if you look around our world right now, what is happening to the church and our culture, what is happening to the younger generations, there's no question. We are losing our identity. It is becoming meaningless. So the question I want to ask, though, noting that it has to start with love and belief, and noting that we are called to truly live in this world, like how? Like how do we live and work and eat and consume media in this world without losing our identity, without becoming just like everyone else? Or maybe to put it a little more clearly, where do we draw the line? Yes, we're called to embrace the world, live in the world, be here, but where do we draw the line? Where does our identity as a follower of Jesus Christ, where do we have to say, oh, but I can't do that? And maybe, here's my heart in this. In what ways do we need to break from the world in order to love and serve the world? Because if you're just as anxious and broken and everything is there, you can't serve them anymore, right? So what do we have to pull away from so that we can actually engage like Jesus? And that brings us to Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1 is a lesson in this. So it begins like this. Daniel chapter 1, starting in verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. So if you're here last week, you remember in 605 BC, something big happened. Assyria over there, Egypt over there, joined up at Carchemish over there to take on Babylon, and the unthinkable happened. This young general named Nebuchadnezzar defeated these two superpowers of the ancient Near East and cleared the slate, so this whole region known as the ancient Near East was now his for the taking. There was no one to stop him, no one to slow him down, and so that's exactly what he did. He took the whole thing over as what we know as the Neo-Babylonian Empire. In the British Museum, there are this series of Cuneiform Tablets. Here's one of them. This one dates from 590 BC. So just after this, early in the time of Daniel, from Nebuchadnezzar. And this is Babylonian Chronicles that chronicles exactly what happened year after year, the historic events, in this one in particular. It describes how Nebuchadnezzar, right after he won that battle, launched a series of minor campaigns across the ancient Near East in order to subjugate the entire place, make the whole place Babylonian, in order to make himself the king of all these little kingdoms, the king of kings. That's what ancient Near Eastern kings would do. One of those minor campaigns took him right here to Judah, right, southern Israel, to besiege Jerusalem. He didn't destroy Jerusalem or depose the king at the time. He would do that later. This was just him going to every kingdom and flexing his muscles to say, I'm now your king. And the Lord literally gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles of the temple of God. These he carried off to his god, the temple of his god in Babylonia, and put in the treasure house of his god Marduk, way up there, 800 miles away. So this is exactly what you'd expect. This is ancient Near Eastern warfare 101, taking the temple articles and back to his god. This is an act of domination. So Nebuchadnezzar, in the popular mindset, he did not just defeat the Jews, he defeated the God of the Jews. Marduk defeated Yahweh. That's what's happening, at least in popular sentiment. One of my favorite pastor theologians, he died recently, or a few years ago, Eugene Peterson. He also translated the Message. You may have heard of it. He tells this story when he was just a little kid. I think he was like first or second grade. And there was this bully named Cecil, who would just come and out of nowhere, just bigger than him, tackle him and beat the tar out of him. And, Eugene grew up in this very Christian family. He knew he should never retaliate. So he would just get beaten black and blue and never knew when this terror, Cecil, was going to come out of nowhere and just beat him to pieces. And he would recite, turn the other cheek, blessed are those who are persecuted, all of that. He said, and then one day, and it was one early March day, Cecil, out of nowhere, on the way home from school, pounced on him and started beating him. And he said something in him snapped. And to his great surprise, he grabbed Cecil and realized, I'm stronger than you. So he threw Cecil to the ground, pinned him to the ground, and then just starts beating his face. And he says, until blood gushed out. And he said, and it was beautiful. And then all the kids circle around. And finally, the bully's getting what he deserves. They're all cheering him on, and he's just enjoying this. And then he says, say, uncle! And Cecil won't do it, so he's pounding him. And then he said, right then, his Christian upbringing reasserted itself. And so he said, say, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior! And Cecil wouldn't do it, so he's pounding, blood squirting. Say, Jesus is my Lord and Savior! And then he said it. And he says, Cecil was my first Christian convert. That's what's taking place in this text. Nebuchadnezzar is not just beating the Jews. He's beating their God. He did this not just in Israel, everywhere. He would go there, he would capture the people, but he would also capture their gods and bring them back to show, my God beat your God. We have total domination over you to completely subjugate you. Now, of course, these were Jews. They were strange. They didn't actually have an idol to capture. But they're temple articles. So he's like, we're going to take those, the table of showbread and this giant menorah and all these things that symbolize your worship of your king. We're going to take those and we're going to take them back and put them on display in the house of my God. If you're an ancient Jew, this is unimaginable. It's hard to... this is traumatic in the technical sense of the term of like your basic assumptions about life get smashed, and your assumptions about safety, about God, about yourself, about family, all of that just gets shattered. Like, was my God really defeated? Who are we without a promised land? Did God's promises just fail? When I have no home, no people, no king, no temple, who am I? Now, if you read the text carefully, though, I've highlighted this. It shows your hand. It shows the hand a little bit because you see the Lord delivered. Literally, it says the Lord gave 3 times in this text. We're going to read the Lord gave, God gave, God gave, and we see that even in the midst of this, God is in control. Nebuchadnezzar didn't take anything. God gave it. It's a small but significant nuance here. This is not the work of Almighty Nebuchadnezzar. This is the work of Almighty God, even if you don't understand it. Nebuchadnezzar can only take what has been given to him. Verse 3. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. So you remember from last week, this is where what separated Assyria and Babylon. Assyria was extraordinary at killing foreign people, just really bad at ruling them. So they got in this position where they had to fight the same people again and again and again and again. And that was just really terribly exhausting for everyone involved. The Babylonians learned from them, and they take a different approach. They knew that the best way to overcome their enemies was not to repeatedly defeat them, but to turn them into Babylonians, to give them a nice Babylonian job, a job with perks, and give them a Babylonian house, and teach them the Babylonian language, and give them a taste of gourmet Babylonian cuisine. They would end their enemies once and for all by making them Babylonians. As we said last week, it's a different kind of war. It's one fought with words, with ideas, with values, with songs, with media. But make no mistake, it is an act of war. And so Daniel and his friends, they are just the type they're looking for. They are smart, athletic, well-born, good-looking Jews, the type of Jews that if we could just get them to assimilate, become part of our culture and represent our king, then the rest of the Jews are just going to go along with it. They're going to follow along, and they might even learn to love Babylon. So this is their plan. And then in verses 4 through 7, we get like this peek into the Babylonian reprogramming strategy. It starts like this. He, Ashpenaz, was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. It begins with their education system and formal education. So language, if you've ever studied a foreign language, you know that it's not just a changing of words. It's a changing of like ideas and phrasing, and it's not just a different words. It's a different way of thinking, a different way of viewing the world. And it's literature here by forcing them to speak Imperial Aramaic and read Cuneiform. They would begin to think and sound differently. It would put a distance between them and a Hebrew way of thinking, a Hebrew way of speaking, the Hebrew people, their home, and their God. So the literature here, the Babylonians also knew what modern psychologists know, that the stories you tell and the stories you don't tell really do make a difference in shaping your mind and how you think and how you see the world. They shape how you view good and bad, what you value, what you love, what you despise. So these young men would have been immersed in texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh, Enuma Elish, the Babylonian Chronicles, the Omen and Incantation texts, these magical texts, the wisdom literature, the Babylonian wisdom literature. They were submerged not just in the stories, but in a whole different way of viewing the world. A Babylonian way of viewing the world. Reprogramming, get this, begins in the educational system. And the same is true today. The difference, of course, is that unlike the Babylonian educational system was explicitly anti-Hebrew, anti-God of the Hebrews. So they literally taught the kids, and Marduk defeated Yahweh, right? Not so much. The American educational system claims to be secular and therefore unbiased in such matters. And this is what makes it so hard to nail down, because no one is going to teach our children that Marduk defeated Jesus. Rather, in order to remain unbiased, we will systematically remove God from our educational system. We will teach our children what it means to be fully human, how to live the good life, what is justice and beauty, without any reference to God. They will teach our children a way of systematically removing God from their lives, a way of seeing the world without God. But don't worry, they're not biased. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. So when I was in Dallas, a friend of mine, he grew up in the projects in Dallas, but he had one great skill. The man could play football, and that was his ticket out. So he grew up and actually made it, got recruited to play at the University of Texas, which in Texas is as like close to royalty as you can become. And he talked about how the football players there, literally, he would go from the projects where they would eat this like nasty, like food stamp cheese that he talked about, to anything. He could order anything he wanted, and they would just show any time he wanted. And the man, he said he went from eating food stamp cheese to endless fillets. That's the picture. These boys from Judah are suddenly given this obscene luxury. They eat at the king's table, and the message is clear. If you participate, if you just join in and become like us, if you just take on what we're asking you to take on, then we are going to reward you. Life is going to be so good. You're going to be a someone. You're going to eat at the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter into the king's service. So it's a 3-year program. This is the University of Babylon. For 3 years, you're to be removed from your family, from your church, your language, your home, everything you know, and your identity, what you believe, who you are, will be deconstructed bit by bit. And then you're to be reconstructed to see the world through Babylonian eyes, through Babylonian values, through a Babylonian way of life. And if you succeed, if you assimilate, if you take all this on, you're promised a great life of wealth, pleasure, social security, opportunity to climb the ladder. You will be someone, you will be important, you will enter the king's service. Again, I hope the parallels with this and the American university system are pretty obvious to you. Verse 6, among those who were chosen were some from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. At least he's kept with some type of theme there. But this right here reveals the real aim of their program. They're not just trying to help them out in life, they're trying to reprogram them. They're trying to give them a new identity. So to change their name, this is an act of authority. This saying, this is who you are. This is your new identity. We are telling you who you are going to be, and this is your Babylonian identity. So he takes away their Hebrew names that are given in reference to Yahweh. So Daniel means something like, the Lord is my judge. And you are given a Babylonian name in reference to Babylonian gods. So Daniel becomes Belteshazzar, which means something like Lord, referring to Marduk, protector of life. And Shadrach and Meshach have something to do with like the moon god, and Abednego with Nebu, the son of Marduk. The specifics aren't what matter, but what matters is that the Babylonians are attempting to erase their identity as the people of God. And there's nothing these young men can do about it. They have no power, no influence, no say. They are helplessly being carried along in this system designed to reprogram them and pop out good little Babylonians at the end. They either go along with it and receive the rewards, it's great, or you die. Those are your options. But verse 8, but Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. Finally, we reach a breaking point. Daniel realizes that if he does not draw the line somewhere, he will not draw the line anywhere. If he loses his life, he's either going to lose his life or he's going to lose his identity. That's his choice. And he chooses he will not lose his identity. That if he eats and lives and works and shops just like everyone else, eventually he'll become just like everyone else. So he resolves, I'm making a decision. I'm not going to defile myself with a royal food and wine. And then he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. He says, we will learn the Babylonian language. We'll speak like Babylonians, we'll look like Babylonians, we'll master their literature, we'll accept Babylonian names, and they will bless the Babylonian city. They will, just like Jeremiah told them to. And they will serve the Babylonian king. They will be faithful, the most faithful servants they've had. But here's where he's going to draw the line. He will not eat the king's food. And the question comes up, why? It seems like, if you're in Daniel's position, this is one of the few perks. Right? You just got ripped out of your homeland. Everything was destroyed. But the good part is you get to live like a king. Come on, man. Eat up. This is the good part. Why not enjoy the food? And there are a number of theories on this. For example, it's quite likely that food that ended up on his plate was butchered at the butcher shop right next to the temple. So it was served as a sacrifice to Marduk, and then that meat ended up on his plate. It's also likely that the wine was poured out as a drink offering in that way. So it could be something cultic, like this is food served to idols, right? It could be, it's true that none of this food would have been anything close to kosher. Not even close. So if you wanted to follow the Old Testament food laws of like separating meat and dairy and forbidding like pig and shrimp, then he might do that. That's one of the reasons why we would go get Indian food with me and the rabbi, because he could get, there's a lot of vegetarian options and he could avoid breaking kosher laws there. So these are probably factors. In this way, the king's food would have felt horribly dirty to these boys from Judah. But none of these quite make sense. Not fully of the situation. Because, I mean, if you dig into it, you realize that those vegetables, too, like even the bread, the loaves of bread that they were served, were probably offered to Marduk or something like that before they came on their plate. Like the vegetables themselves were probably offered to Babylonian gods. And there's really no getting around the kosher laws because just being in Babylon, eating that food, everything about the situation is technically unclean according to biblical standards. So, I mean, why not? Like, why not? If you're going to go for it, man. Enjoy it. Eat it up. And the best theory that I've stumbled upon is by a scholar named Joyce Baldwin. And since then, others have followed her. And I think she's on to something. She argues that the reason Daniel rejects the king's food probably isn't because it's something in the food. It's not because there's like pork in there or it was food served to idols. But it's probably simply that it's the king's food. And that's all. In the ancient world, and in some parts of the world even today, table fellowship is really, really important. Who you eat with. So it's where we get the word companion. With bread, companion. It's who you eat with is who you're friends with. This is why it's such a big deal when Jesus is eating with sinners. You're eating with sinners. You're in relationship with them. Why would you do that? So to eat with someone suggests that you're in relationship with them, be it business, family, something like that. Meals formed and kept relationships. So in the Old Testament, Exodus, when God wants to take these people who are slaves and he wants to make them into his very children, what does he do? He takes them out. He serves them flatbread, barbecue, wine, Passover. And I'm going to turn you into my children. And that's how we're going to remember every single year through the Passover feast. Almost every sacrifice in the Old Testament ends in this massive barbecue. Like we're going to eat together as the people of God and we're going to eat with God. To this day, how do we maintain an intimate relationship with the Lord of the universe? Through bread and wine and communion. So eating, historically and to this day, it's always meant something like that. So here, to eat the king's food was to embrace the fact that you were in covenant relationship with the king, that he was your king, that he is my king, and that was too much for Daniel. This is where he drew the line. He knew that to enjoy, listen to this, to enjoy the pleasure of a personal relationship with the king of Babylon would be a step too far. He would lose his identity. He would lose his connection with the real king. So he resolved not to defile himself. The only problem is he has no power, so he can't just say, I'm not going to do it. He has to ask permission. Verse 9. Now God gave, literally the second God gave here. God calls the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. And this is not like a metaphorical thing. He would literally have his head. He would chop off my head if he found out that I let you refuse his food. Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the other young men who eat the royal food and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. Now, I want you to notice 3 things about this test that he lays out. Please test your servants for 10 days. The first thing I want you to notice is how extraordinarily, miraculously polite Daniel is about this whole thing. He disagrees without being disagreeable. He doesn't want to make the chief official look bad. He works to cover it up. Hey, I'm not going to make you look bad. He doesn't list his demands. He's winsome. He is wise in how he does it. Now later, we do find out that when he's told don't pray, I'm sorry guys, I'm just going to break that rule. I'm not going to obey the king, even if it means being thrown to the lions. We know that he will draw a line and do that, but he's never disparaging, never pits himself against them, never calls them names, never feels like he has to put them down. He is polite and winsome to Babylonians. To Babylonians who just besieged his precious homeland and killed thousands. to Babylonians who trample and mock everything that's sacred, to Babylonians who worship this ridiculous god named Marduk, who's like the embodiment of like machismo and violence. They are explicitly trying to erase his culture, his people, his faith. And he's polite to them. He's kind. He's winsome. Daniel has every reason to be seething with hatred. So you know what the song of the exile is? Psalm 137. I think you know the first line. They're on the Kebar Canal just outside. And by the rivers of Babylon, we sat and we wept when we remembered Zion and what they had done to us and what they had taken away from us. But do you know how it ends? Oh, it ends on a happy note. Daughter Babylon, doomed to destruction, happy is the one who repays you according to what you've done to us. Happy is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks, because that's exactly what they did in the siege, the final siege of Babylon, of Jerusalem. While the Jews were all trapped inside of Jerusalem, they would come, and in order to demoralize them over that 2-year period when they starved them out, they would capture families, rip young babies out of the hands of their mothers, go to the city walls in front of everyone who's watching, take the young baby by the feet, and bash its head against the rocks. Daniel is polite to these people. So here's the question. If Daniel can be polite to Babylonians, do you think it's possible that you could be polite to someone who disagrees with you over masks, vaccines, voting rights, social justice issues? Do you think it's possible? I'm betting you can. I'm betting it's possible. I'm betting that there's a godly way to do this. Number one, notice how extraordinarily polite he is. Number two, I want you to notice this is not dietary advice. There is no such thing as the Daniel diet, guys. That's just not a thing. Like, this passage does not teach that vegetarianism is better than other diets. It probably is. Now, I'm biased. I'm vegetarian, or my kids call me cheetitarian, so pretty close. I wish I could quote chapter and verse to tell you why vegetarianism makes me a better, more godly person than you. But it's just not so. The Bible nowhere will teach the superiority of vegetarianism. This is not about diets. Daniel's refusing to fully assimilate into Babylonian culture, period. He's drawing a line. This is about Daniel's refusal to give up his identity as a child of the true king. I will not give up my seat at that table. I will not stop serving him. You cannot entice me. There is no reward good enough. There's nothing you can offer me in this world that would make me give up my true king. I will die before I do that. That's what this is about. This is not dietary advice. If someone tells you that you need to follow a Daniel diet, then I want you to instruct them that the priest of old, in service of worship at the temple, they ate a diet that involved copious amounts of like flatbread, barbecue, and wine. Right? So I'm vegetarian now for my health, but in the new heavens and earth, I will eat a priestly diet. All right, so Daniel is polite. This is not about diet, but then probably the thing that is most important for us right here is I want you to notice how subtle this is. There are hundreds and maybe thousands of ways Daniel could have justified eating that food. Nobody's watching him. Like, no one's going to blame him. This is a life or death situation. No one's going to blame you, Daniel. Enjoy it. Live it up. You can do it. You're there. No one's going to blame you. But he knows that if he doesn't draw the line somewhere, he will probably not be able to draw the line anywhere. So he doesn't wait until they ask him, bow down to that idol or stop praying. He doesn't wait till then. He seems to know, and this is so subtle. Listen to this. The pleasure of eating the king's food is way more seductive and way more threatening than reading the propaganda of Babylon. I want you to notice this. This is the way reprogramming really works. It's not the full-scale assault of secular education that you should be worried about. It's when you start enjoying the pleasures of a secular culture, pleasures of life without God. That's when you should get nervous. The heart is much more quickly formed indirectly through pleasure, habit, and relationship than the mind can be formed directly through information. So, how you use your cell phone and who you hang out with probably says way more about your life than the lectures you listen to or even the sermons you listen to. The same is true in the formation of godliness here. So I'm way more concerned that you make a habit of enjoying God in relationship with one another, enjoying God in relationship with one another, than that you go back and listen to my entire catalog of sermons, although of course it'd be better if you did both. Very subtle. Verse 15. At the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished, literally healthier and fatter than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead, and they became immediately unpopular. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge. God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into a service 3 years, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in the whole kingdom. So God, verse 2, God gave Jehoiakim to Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 9, God gave Daniel favor with the official. And here God, verse 17, God gave knowledge and understanding to these 4 men. These 2 words become key. Knowledge and understanding from God is what they would need to survive that cultural gauntlet, to detect the ways that the Babylonians were undermining their faith, to live and serve in that world without becoming part of it, to recognize the difference between truth and lies, to know when to embrace and when to pull away, to know how to live and work and serve in Babylon without losing their identity. They would need wisdom and knowledge and understanding from God. And then it ends with this verse. And Daniel remained there until the 1st year of King Cyrus. So Daniel, this young man who they would work so hard at assimilating, turning him into a Babylonian, the one who refused to defile himself, he would outlive the Babylonian king, the Babylonian kingdom, and the Babylonian culture. That Babylon might seem unstoppable and unimaginably powerful and big, and like, if you don't get on board with this, you're going to become a nobody. Your life's going to go down the drain. You might think you have every reason to link your hope, your success, your future with that culture, but Babylon won't last. Those things that seem so powerful, so important, so all-consuming today, just wait. This too shall pass. So it brings us back to that question. How do we live, eat, shop, work? How do we participate in this world without losing our identity? How do we do this without becoming just like everyone else? Like, when do we draw this line? When do we need to break away from the world in order to love the world and reject the culture in order to not lose our identity? That question, where do you draw the line? And guys, I want you to wrestle with this. I really think if you don't, we're lost. We're lost. So 2 things that I want to pull out of this text. The first is just the approach. How we approach this question. I think if you go through this thinking that you're going to find a right answer to every cultural question, you're probably going to run into lots of troubles here. The key to this text, the only possible way to navigate this type of complexity is knowledge and understanding that only God can give. So James chapter 1, James puts it this way: if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. That our decisions about how we enter into culture, what we participate in, where we draw the line, our decisions about our relationships, about what we consume, what we don't consume, our decisions about where we work and where we go to school, our decisions have to be bathed in prayerful discernment. Or to say it maybe a little more directly, our confidence is not in the fact that we're going to get everything right or have all the right answers. It's in a right relationship with the Lord of the universe. Our confidence is that we are going to pray every single day, give us this day our daily bread and lead us not into temptation. Every single day, it is in that constant relationship that we're safe. If you think that you're going to have the right answers or set up the right program, you're not. So our approach is absolutely key here. But there are two specifics I do want us to think on. One is in the next 2 weeks, I want us to press into this. And the one is the obvious implication of this, and that's the younger generation. It is no secret that millions are walking away from the faith right now, mostly from the younger generations. There is no question that the Babylonian reprogramming system lives on today, and a war is raging in the American culture and educational system in particular. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not talking about cultural wars where we win dominance. I'm talking about unseen forces, what we talked about last week, spiritual forces. I'm talking about our hearts. I'm talking about who's your king. So it's a different kind of war. It's one fought with words and ideas and values and songs and media, but make no mistake, we are at war. And this requires much wisdom. So rather than just tack this on as an afterthought, as though like, oh, and yeah, you have kids, so make sure you raise them like Christians. What I want to do is next Sunday, I've asked 4 different parents from GVF, all who have 4 different perspectives. 4 different perspectives to join us for a discussion. So the bulk of the Sunday morning next week will not be me preaching, but it's me asking questions just to help you process, help you think into it. How do I want to live? How do I want to raise kids? How do I want to speak into younger generations? Or maybe you're there. Like, how is this affecting me? Just to process, like, how do we want to live in this time and think through this, and specifically with the younger generation and parenting and those issues. So that's the first thing, but that'll be next week. Where I want to land today is simply with this question: where do you draw the line? Like with you. If you don't draw the line somewhere, you're not going to draw it anywhere. Where do you need to resolve not to defile yourself? And I want you to think through what Daniel was looking at here. Notice he read the literature. He went to the schools. He took on the new name. He served in the kingdom. He did all of that. But it was the pleasure of eating at the king's table. So what pleasure, habit, or relationship do you need to refuse? Like, if you don't refuse, it will seduce you and quietly undermine your relationship with God. I cannot answer this for you, but as I've wrestled through this, and I can answer this for you, but if I do, it will be a law to you. It'll be external to you, and we will be no better than a synagogue where I will tell you, this is how we behave. It doesn't matter what you believe or love, and that is not the way of Jesus. You need God to reach into your heart and give you a new heart. And out of that love for him, you need to decide, where would it defile my relationship and not give me the king that I love so dearly, all right? And so I want to suggest to you, like, one thing that's just popped up on my radar, and maybe this is just for me, and maybe this is for us as a church, but something that comes up again and again is probably not the one you'd think. It's Sabbath. Sabbath in our culture is totally countercultural. It is refusing for one day a week to participate in that craziness that is our culture, that insanity, and just enjoying our God in relationship with one another. It's those fundamental things that are going to anchor our hearts in the Lord. And maybe that's not it for you. Over the following weeks, we're going to talk about some other ideas from Daniel, about things that we probably need to build into our lives if we want to keep our identity as the people of God and keep that relationship with God central in our lives. But I want you to ask, as you leave today, where is it? Where do you need to draw the line and politely refuse to take what the world is serving up to you today? Let's pray. Father, I am thankful for Daniel and thankful that I don't have to make this journey alone, that we're going on this together, Lord. I pray that we can be an encouragement to one another as we try and walk this journey and follow your Son and try and figure out what does it look like today for us to cling to our identity in Jesus and reflect him in a way that loves the culture, serves the culture. God, we need wisdom, we need understanding, we need knowledge, and we don't have it. Will you give it to us? We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.